Oh, hello. Welcome to the 2013 Hundie Challenge. Today we're going to be discussing The Naked Lunch by Norman Schwarzkopf. Dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo-doo, dee-doo-dee-doo-doo, dee-doo-doo-doo-dee-doo-doo-doo. So there have not been too many war novels in this challenge so far. In fact, the only one that jumps out at me is Catch-22. I sort of feel like that can't be right. Certainly that one was about World War II. And The Naked and the Dead is about World War II as well. It's much more serious, and it takes itself much more seriously. I still think it's an excellent book. I already went over the virtues of Catch-22 and the sort of the surrealness of Army life. The Naked and the Dead... Let me describe, first of all, the structure of this book, which I didn't like. I'm still rating it very, very highly. But I want to talk about the structure real quick, which was kind of a negative. And then I want to talk about some of the specifics, which were more positive. It was structured like this. So it was during a campaign, during the Pacific campaign of the Second World War, during either a fictional or rather minor battle. I'm guessing it's fictional, on an island called Anapope. I'm not, as you know from watching this series, I'm not much interested in doing a whole lot of research on these books. I'm just trying to get through them. In any case, it went like this. The first chapter would be the present day of, the contemporary of the time of 1943 or 4 or thereabouts. If they stated the date, I missed it, but I was listening to this on the audio book, so I don't blame myself for missing the date. So they would do one chapter that was contemporary that had to do with the war. And then the next chapter, he called it The Time Machine. And then he went back and described what other character, maybe not necessarily the most important character in the last chapter, but oftentimes it panned out that way, how that character grew up, became the man he was, some kind of significant event from his past. So, knowing that, and having described that structure, I wish that this book was about half the length, because I got almost nothing out of the Time Machine chapters. I thought they were insipid, and I thought they were extraneous. And I think clearly Norman Mailer thought that they were, the best part and the cleverest part of his book, that would somehow illuminate the characters and show who they were. But the truth is that the characters were already there on the page. You knew who they were. You didn't have to know that the one they called Polak was a Polish guy who grew up in Chicago as a hustler. It was all there on the page. You didn't have to know that Goldstein was a family man who, grew up in Brooklyn or the Bronx or wherever it was. It wasn't really illuminating. You or other readers may differ with me on that. I just didn't really... It's not to say that I didn't see the point. I know what his point was. I know what his goal was. I just felt like it was not accomplished. Now, that being said, aside from the kind of tedious time machine parts, the actual story itself was very compelling, which is also part of the reason why, okay, you have an A story and a B story, but when your A story is that strong, you don't cut away to go to the B story that is stupid. I want to say 9 or 10 characters. I didn't really add them up. There's several major characters, but I tend to think of the crux of the book, if you want to call him the main character, is a lieutenant named Hearn. I was very drawn to Hearn's story and intrigued by it, because, I was a lieutenant once myself, and he was the general's aide, General Cummings. I was never a general's aide, but I did serve on the staff, and the Hearn chapters were very clever at skewering staff work, which is something that you don't see in movies and novels about war normally. That's usually the part that is off screen. So I enjoyed that they had that on there, and then he didn't take it too seriously, but I don't feel like he really belittled anyone. I think he was at least as serious about his staff members as he was about anyone else. So if they were a little cliche, that's because all of his characters were a little cliche. But in any case, back to Hearn. Hearn was the general's aide, which is a very cushy job. And even more so, in this case, he has a rather unusual, almost kind of a perverse relationship with the general. I think the general sees Hearn as the only person he can confide in, and yet he doesn't trust him. And in a way, he sees him as a protege, but he also sees him as kind of a threat to his power. It's almost like a sort of a Rushmore situation between Bill Murray and Jason Schwartzman. Like, there's no reason why this guy should be a threat to my power, but I feel that way about him. And the general is kind of a, I would say he's a tyrant, but he has some very peculiar, or at least offbeat ideas about discipline, leadership, and how to take care of the men. And like, he feels that there are times when, even if he's kind of a soft, cuddly person himself, he feels that there are times when he has to be a dick or play mind games because like the men need it, and like he feels that some kind of mind game will be helpful at this point in time, and he ends up trying to play an unusual amount of mind games with Hearn. And ultimately, it leads to a falling out. Now, throughout the whole rest of the book, we're also introduced to this platoon of reconnaissance soldiers, which is also something you rarely see in books and movies. Recon is not usually depicted. Anyway, as it turns out, Hearn has a falling out with the general, and as a sort of a punishment, but Hearn almost takes it as a relief, he's assigned to this recon platoon during a theoretically very important mission, on which he is killed because of the betrayal of his NCO, who resented his power. That this lieutenant would come in and try to take over for this guy, Croft, who had been doing fine up until then. And, in a sense, Croft is doing it for the good of the platoon, but he's also doing it because he's kind of a martinet himself. It was really interesting. Now that I think about it, a lot of the pathways and themes in this story had to do with, power and the dangers of power and, who should have it and how people wield it and, leadership and all that sort of stuff. And then the ending was very similar to some of what Tolstoy wrote in War and Peace. The campaign was won sort of by a fluke. Basically, there was no need for a campaign. The Japanese had already crumbled, and the Americans just hadn't realized it. So there's kind of this buffoonish staff officer major who didn't even like being on the staff. When the general was away, he sort of felt obliged to do something because a report had come up. And then in like a day, the entire campaign was over, and the entire mission that Hearn and Croft and those guys went off on not only failed, they failed in their mission, and Hearn died, and Roth died, a couple of the characters died, but it also turned out to be completely pointless, and the general was wrong that this reconnaissance patrol had to take place. And so that gave a very cynical, very jaded edge to it. It's a very dark book, very satirical. It's serious in a sense. It's certainly more serious than Catch-22, but it's definitely still excellent because of its dark satirical edge. So I rate this very highly. If you're watching this video, I recommend you just skip over the Time Machine chapters because I got nothing out of them. And if I wasn't doing this challenge and I hadn't listened to it on audiobook, I might have just skipped over themselves myself. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.